Welcome to another episode of Video Store Rejects. This is a podcast where we discuss directors' filmographies and our favorite film franchises. I'm your host, Cody House. With me is my co host, Chris Jacobs.
How's it going, everyone?
And we have a returning guest, a regular Renaissance person, if I say so myself, Minette Bryant. Welcome back. Can you hear me?
I
You know?
can. Do you want me to introduce myself?
Oh, I did introduce you. Did you not hear me?
Right. And I just hi. I think we've got a little bit of a lag. I talk
Okay.
and you're it sounds like. So you asked me if I wanted to talk about Oh Brother Where Art Thou. To me, that's like asking me if I want ice cream.
So yeah, we're talking the go.
Now see,
Sorry.
we've got this lag problem. It's okay. You go.
So yes, we are doing the Coen Brothers as our directors right now, and we are at what I think maybe not their most financially successful film, but I would say this is probably their most culturally popular film out of their filmography, or at least in the top 3 or 2 of those, because this is usually the one Coen brother movie that people I know that don't typically like their movies will be like, I like this one. This one's fun.
This is one of my parents' favorite movies. So, and if they watched any of their other films, I guarantee you, they wouldn't get them and probably, be angry at me for watching such filth. When we was nice, but this is like everyone's grandparents' movie or parents' movie. Um, Even though it is very Coen Brothers.
Well, at this point in my life, I am everyone's parents, so that works out perfectly for me.
Right.
My doctorate is in Western literature, and that includes an absolute ongoing obsession with Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And so this film, along with the darker film Cold but that film is also based on Odyssey, although if you watch it from that standpoint, you recognize what that is. Coen Brothers were making a version of Homer's Odyssey with this wonderful cast. I'm a huge Holly Hunter fan. Of course, I was going to be there on opening night. It is very loosely based on the Odyssey. It plays with the names and it plays with some of the circumstances, but also it really stands beautifully on its own. Someone going in there who's never read the Odyssey or didn't have to study it in middle school or whatever, they're still going to absolutely adore this film for all of the elements, the sepia tone filming, the old the Southern Gospel soundtrack, the comic characters, never minding the all-star cast. There's the underdog day. They are already a fan or even have any knowledge of Homer at all.
That's interesting because Tim Blake Nelson also has a degree in classic literature, and apparently he was the only person on the set of the movie that had actually read the Odyssey.
Wow.
Because apparently he lived next door to the Coens, and when the Coens gave him the script, he thought he just wanted him as a consultant and not to cast him, and they were like, no, we want you in the movie as an actor.
Oh, that's great. Whoops.
Yeah, yeah. This. So, what are your thoughts on this, Chris? While we're waiting on Minette to come back.
Well, again, like back when I watched this, like when it came out, I wasn't just fully immersed in Coen Brothers yet. I believe I had seen Lebowski, and I was still in that Lebowski stage where I liked it, but I still didn't know what to think about it because it takes people several times of watching that movie before it clicks or they get it, I was still in that first second watch stage, but this movie came out and I was like, oh, Coen Brothers, that sounds familiar. I think they're the ones who did. Um, I think they're the ones who did that movie. I really like. So I gave it a shot and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Now I wasn't really well versed with Homer or the Odyssey, and that made me go back and do some research. So that's another positive thing that happened when I watched it. It kind of opened my eyes to that. So
Is that because you heard it was kind of loosely based off the Odyssey, and you're like, oh, that's cool?
yeah, really, I had heard of it. I was familiar with it, but I never. It's something I hadn't read, and I wasn't just really well versed in it, and that made me like, wow. Well, I really want to know what they're referencing and what they're adapting. I want to know the material that they're adapting from, and that just made me love it even more. After I did study that. And growing up, just I don't know, just uh, in the area that we're in, Deep East Texas, and it just I don't know, a lot of it kind of hit home. Like I could just imagine that's what kind of what East Texas was like because we're not far off. It was set in is that Mississippi or
Yeah, it's set in Depression era Mississippi.
right. So I don't know. It was cool. It was just a great movie, and the more I've watched it over the years, the more it's grown on me. Like the more I pick up and just little details here and there, and the dialogue and the soundtrack. I could go on and on.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because the Coens really had not read the Odyssey when they wrote this. They basically just knew the structure of the story and kind of the major plot points
Wow,
of what was going on.
that's incredible. That's like the dialogue in all their films is always one of the delights to me. It's just the way they write dialogue and the way that the actors deliver the dialogue. And this movie right here is one of those where the dialogue really stands out. Um,
Yeah.
like when John Goodman sits down at their table and George Clooney is like, "Oh, I see you have the gift of gab, uh, like I do," and
Hi, this is Minette Bryant. I'm sorry I missed you, but leave me a message.
Well, she asked if I could call her. I'm going to see if we can get her on speaker and it'll pick up in my microphone. If not, I guess we're going to move this over to Skype
okay,
and see if that will work. So I'll see if she'll call me back and see if it'll pick her up on my microphone or not.
right, right.
I'm not sure if it will.
But this movie, as far as dialogue goes, this movie and True Grit, the way they wrote the dialogue in these two movies is just what some of my favorite.
Oh yeah, you always the dialogue always in a Coen Brothers movie is great. Okay, we're gonna
Yeah,
try
just
again. Okay, it's saying there
little.
Mike and Cam before you can add them.
Well, a little off topic here, but doesn't Prey look amazing?
Oh, Prey looks absolutely amazing.
I cannot wait, and the fact that they're going to have it in, was it Lakota?
I think so. Yes.
Is just awesome. I'm gonna have to watch it in Lakota.
Minette, if you're in, I did try calling. I can call again. We can see if your phone. I can put you on speaker and see if that'll pick up in my microphone. Okay. Let me try again. Can you hear that?
Yeah, I can hear it.
Okay. Hello? Hi, this is Cody. Yeah, a little bit. I might need
So
to.
that was
This is.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I understand. Chris, can you hear her?
Yeah, I can hear.
Okay. Okay, so it looks like you are picking up in my microphone with me holding the phone on the microphone. I don't know if you can hear me though, because I'm kind of talking in between the two.
I hear you.
Okay, perfect. We kind of were all over the place. That's fine, but are you a fan of the Coen Brothers in general?
I I I am in general, and one thing that stands out about this film is that it lacks the overt violence that some of their other films rely on. And I think that's one of the reasons why it is sort of everybody's parents' film, because
Right.
other
And no,
films like Fargo
and to
has
clarify, I
all
did not
of
mean to
the
insult anyone
but it also
with
has so
that.
much violence. And I prefer not to watch something that's so up close violent. But
Right.
lacks that. It it's a comedy. It's a love story. It's extremely clever in its weaving. It's a musical, even though it's not really a musical, but the music is kind of its own character. The music choices, and this is something the Coen Brothers are really good at, is interesting music choices. And in this film, particularly, as I said, the soundtrack is a character unto itself. And then when you add to that all of the, I mean, there are parts of it that are sort of almost silly, like the sirens. If you don't know the Homer story, there are moments like that you might not quite understand. But the way that they wove in the elements into the story is just genius, and every bit of it is a gift for those of us who go in looking for that.
Absolutely, I agree. Uh, I think another thing that makes it stand out is it's one of the few films of theirs that has a general happy ending. Because
Right, the underdog story. Love that.
because generally in the Coen Brothers universe, the world of karma is very much intact. I don't know their personal politics, but typically when characters do terrible things in a Coen Brothers movie, terrible things happen to them. Even if it's by accident, not even intentional terrible acts, but it always comes back to them tenfold.
So in Homer, that's true also. And this is the thing about Odysseus. The reason we have a story about Odysseus or Ulysses, which is the Roman name, which they actually use here, that George Clooney's character is Ulysses Everett McGill. The Odysseus character. The reason we have a story of him at all is because it took him so flippin' long to get home. Everybody else either died or they just went home. And Odysseus has this long epic story because it took him so long to get home. And that was a punishment to him for deeds that he had done to offend the gods, not just his own, but his men also. And ultimately, it was Poseidon who said, "You'll make it home, but only after a very long time, and you will have lost everything." And so ultimately, he had none of his men were with him anymore, and he somebody else had to, kind of like the Israelites wandering in the desert for 40 years in something that should have taken, maybe 3 days walk.
Right.
It should have been able to get from Troy, which is Turkey, to the island of Ithaca. It was maybe a good 3 days sail, and it took him 9 years to get home because he had offended the gods, and this was his punishment. So there is that karma that you're talking about, that reap what you sow. But I know we're not talking about Fargo, but there's a whole other. There is still a happy ending there for the good people. Bad people should get their comeuppance. So in this, it's a very his original crime, which we don't see, but his original crime that he was incarcerated for was pretending to be a dentist, practicing dentistry without a license, which seems like a funny thing to wind up in a chain gang for.
Right.
He did. At the very beginning, we see his escape. His initial, he's heading home. He's got his men with him. Thankfully, in this film, he doesn't lose all of his people. That would have been tragic. But not happy. And the first thing that they do is they go to Pete's cousin's house to get their chains knocked off, right? In the Homeric story, the first thing that that Odysseus and his people do is they stop at a little island city and they sack it. That's what they always did. They would sack a city, kill everybody, and take a plunder because that's how they kept their stores up on the ship. That's not a good thing to do. And I think that it's represented here in that he, obviously they wound up with the barn burned down, but he stole the watch that belonged to Pete's cousin, which then comes up and becomes a fight later. That's the closest to sacking a city that we see him doing. But the crimes that he committed against the gods, to offend the gods, are really twofold. One was that he blinded the Cyclops, and in the Odyssey, the Cyclops scene is horrific. In this case, he didn't actually skewer him in the eyeball with a hot stick. They just character, the one-eyed character played by John Goodman, just takes everything that happened, walks away at the beginning. We see him again at the end. The other crime that Odysseus committed was that his men, having specifically been told to leave alone the cattle that belonged to Helios, the sun god, they couldn't help themselves. They had to slaughter and eat some of those white cattle. And so now they're in trouble for that. And so I think that that's covered in that one scene, that one moment where they're in the car with Babyface Nelson, and he shoots the white cow, and they're saying, "Oh, not the livestock." I think that's the one little gift of from Homer. There is that they were in trouble for slaughtering the cow, a white cow. So there are all kinds of little gifts like that throughout the movie. The number one thing they play with, though, is names. So, like Homer Stokes, they use the name Homer. That obviously, that character, he's kind of the bad guy. He has nothing to do with Homer the poet, but they use that name. And then the other Homer is meant like Happy O'Diddy, and Lennox obviously being the husband of, and then fought through the whole Trojan War. And then Holly Hunter's character is Penny, and in the original story, Odysseus is headed home to his faithful wife Penelope. But in the original story, Penelope had all these suitors waiting for her. A bunch of violent men had taken over her home, waiting for her to choose one, in the assumption that Odysseus was dead and she wouldn't ever choose one. In the Coen Brothers version, she has chosen a suitor. She's perfectly happy with him. He's going to take care of the Warby girls and buy them lessons on the violin.
He's bona fide.
Right,
Yeah.
he's bona fide. But obviously, his character wins her back. And so those are some of the names they play with. At the beginning, Soothsayer, the old man on the push cart on the railroad that told him many things. You'll see a cow on top of a cotton field. That is one of the things that Odysseus has to do before he is allowed to go home is to visit a blind prophet whose name is Tiresias. And Tiresias then directs him. He has to go and get some answers before he can come back out and go. So kind of the hell and back story, and Tiresias, we have those elements throughout. Homer's epic, though, did not include the incredible soundtrack, and it's the proof for it.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that the soundtrack being its own character. I think the soundtrack ended up being more popular than the actual movie. It won, I forget how many Grammys. I know it won like Album of the Year. Like, it was huge.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that puts it in good company with things like Love Story, which I think would be rotting in a can, but for the iconic soundtrack. The Way We Were, which is another thing, which the movie is just not even any good, except that the soundtrack is unforgettable.
Right.
In this case, the movie is excellent on its own, but the soundtrack, like I said, is its own character.
To me, it reminds me of like American Graffiti and
that everybody remembers when the three guys, the singing of the sirens, and get they can't help themselves. They get caught up with these women who are doing their washing. In the original, the sirens were. Some people picture them as mermaids. We don't really know. They're women. They have beautiful singing voices. Any man who heard them singing would throw themselves into the sea. And original Odysseus has his men tie him to the mast of the ship so that he cannot get away, and then he has them all stuff their ears, but he wants to hear, but he can't get away, even though he desperately wants to. In this, he gets caught right up and hears it and wakes up probably with a hangover. But after that, they discover that Pete is gone, or possibly turned into a toad. So this sort of combines two of the things from Homer, because first of all, the sirens were their own thing, and they got past that, and nobody threw themselves in the sea. But the other thing is the Circe, and Circe would turn men into pigs or hogs, and I guess that would have been too difficult for them to put in a shoebox, but hog rhymes with frog, so I guess that's why they chose frog. There are plenty of pigs in Mississippi also, but they went with the frog so they could carry it. So they sort of combined Circe and the sirens in that scene, but of course it turns out he wasn't turned into a frog at all. That would have been a little too much for this movie. It would have taken it in a different direction. And in truth, they just sold piece. There are a lot of questions that I have about that scene. You can tell me what you think. If they got them all drunk and passed out and then sold, took Pete in for the reward, why didn't they take the other two?
Maybe they could only carry the one, and they were gone when they got back or something.
Yeah, I guess that is a plot hole because they would all three have been wanted men, but
Right.
I guess with the whole possibly he's a toad, it's just hilarious. And I think Tim Blake Nelson might be my favorite character in the movie just for his delivery. But I love where he's like, they loved him up and turned him into a horny toad.
Yeah. My favorite is when he's sitting there talking about his prison time.
The whole thing, his delivery of every single line that he has, is just he makes the film. And until that film, I didn't know him from anything.
Same.
And since then, every time I see him in anything, I'm like, oh, look, there's Delmar.
I think he's got great delivery. I think the character is just a genuinely nice person, even though he's robbed a Piggly Wiggly, apparently. But like when Everett Clooney's character is all distraught about his wife remarrying, and he's talking about all about these women and like, don't get yourself in that nest, and he's like, oh, I can't think about that till I get the family farm back.
Yeah.
Right.
When he's sitting there.
I wanted to point out about when they pick up Tommy, and he says he fell to the devil, and Tommy, he asks, what did the devil look like? Well, and he says, well, he's got a bifurcated tail and walks around with a pitchfork. And Tommy corrects him and says, no, he's got big empty eyes, and he loves hanging around with a mean old hound. And then, of course, we see that sheriff who's after them the whole time, and he's always got the sunglasses on, and they show the sunglasses reflecting the fire. That's all very reminiscent of the character, not of Hades, because Hades, the god of the underworld, really doesn't interact with people. But it's Charon, the ferryman, who is described not necessarily in. I don't think Charon is described in Homer, but in Virgil's Aeneid, he is described as having big empty eyes full of fire. And of course, Cerberus, the three-headed hound, is his spot there at the banks of the River Styx. So I think that's what we're supposed to think, not the devil himself, but Charon, the ferryman, who you have to pay to get across the river. And so apparently Thomas has already made a deal for his salvation. And then, of course, in Greek mythology, there is no heaven or hell. It's all just a thing. And if you are buried properly, you get to go. And so the idea of selling yourself to the devil is something that we've concocted since then, because there was devil. But Charon was a scary character you had to face down to pay, so he could ferry you across into the underworld. So that's that moment where they're showing the fire reflecting in his sunglasses. That's straight out of Virgil's Aeneid, where they describe Charon the ferryman, and obviously the hound then is the three-headed monster dog. I'm probably going to regret asking me to do this, because I'm just going to talk to you about Greek mythology.
No, that's fine, because I am going to shamefully admit I have never read the Odyssey from opening to ending. I just kind of know the structure and the plot points. So.
Well, and that's what the Coen Brothers did also. They did the structure and plot points, and they sort of mixed them in. So things are not necessarily in the same order. It's just kind of a nod here and there. Like I said, mostly the use of the names, the idea that it's all these different things that delay him, and the various things that the crimes that he commits against the gods that make make the journey take longer. So a minute ago when I was talking about John Goodman's character, the Bible salesman, and here's what's interesting about that, just another little nod, is that the actual Cyclops, whose name was Polydora, was a shepherd. And so he kept sheep, and I'm going to bring that up again here in a minute, but he kept sheep in his cave, and he kept them out on the fields and brought them into his cave at night, and he actually lived pretty peacefully. But Odysseus and his men showed up when he was not home, and they went into his cave, and they just started eating his cheese and drinking the milk that he had collected from his sheep, and then when he came home, they clearly expected him, as hospitality was super important to the Greeks. They expected that he was going to treat them to the kind of hospitality that it would be. Yes, and of course he did not. He did not like that they were there, and he started eating them instead. And because he kept he would close the cave with a big stone, they couldn't get out. And so ultimately what they did is they blinded him, the one eye that he had, and then they escaped by each man got up under one of his sheep and just held on tight underneath the sheep, so that when he opened the door and let his sheep out, and he couldn't see, he could just feel the sheep, he didn't realize there was a man under each one of them. And so when we see the Cyclops again, the John Goodman character, he is, well, first of all, let me back up and say, originally he's a Bible salesman, which is kind of an analogy to the shepherd. And I think he even talks about finding your flock. He's a shepherd in that way. And then at the end, he is in the Ku Klux Klan, and they're all dressed in their white robes. And I think that our characters who escape their fate by putting on the robes is akin to hiding under the white sheep to get out of the Cyclops' cave. So there are just some other things like that are a nod, sort of a modernist nod to Homer, that wouldn't make any difference if you didn't know that story.
Right.
And the symbolism of the Cyclops, or the sheep, or the shepherd, or the Bible salesman, and how all those things go together.
Well, he doesn't get blinded, though. That Confederate flag they throw almost gets him.
Right, but then ultimately the cross gets him. So
yeah,
he meets his end anyway. In the story, in the original story, Polydora, the Cyclops, is the son of Poseidon.
Oh.
And so that is why Poseidon then says, because they blinded Polydora, Poseidon says, well, then by the time you make it home, you won't have anything left, and it'll be a long time. So then when Odysseus does make it home, he has to go in disguise, and he disguises himself as a very old man, and he has the help of Athena, the goddess, to actually transform him into an old man, so that literally all of his physique is like a withered old man. Because if he's recognized, he'll be besieged by these men. He wants to show up and get an opportunity to see a lay of the land before he reveals himself and then takes down the suitor. And so that is reflected in them putting on those old the white beards. They wear the beards. And when he's singing, one of my favorite moments is when George Clooney is singing on the stage there where his wife is, and she's already recognized him, but he had about you might think I'm just a stranger, and on stranger he tugs at his beard so you can see his whole face. That's also a nod to Homer in the way that Odysseus had to come home disguised as an old man before he could make some decisions. Things. Also, when Odysseus left, there's conflict over exactly what it was, but either when he left, his son Telemachus was just born or was not born yet. And so there is also that nod that he comes home and there's a child. There's another one. And so in the Odyssey, when he comes home, he meets his son really for the first time, but his son is like 18, not a baby. Another little nod there for Penny.
Right, which is a great little exchange because she says the new fiance's last name, and he's like, "No, that's McGill."
Right. I think she uses the name Warvey, which is her maiden name.
Oh, okay.
His last name is Waldrop.
That's right.
The little Warvey girls, and that's because he hears them singing. He knows it's them. He goes to hear them sing, and then they're announced as the little Warvey girls, and that's why he confronts her and he says, "What's this Warvey girls? Their name is Gil." No, their daddy was hit by a train.
Which is pretty funny too. Just that they're just so good at that back and forth with dialogue. Which, besides your expert knowledge on Greek mythology, I know you're a big classic movie fan. Do you know where the title of this movie comes from?
No. What is it specifically? Because I know at the beginning they use the lines. I mean, this is what Man of Constant Sorrow comes from. They actually call Odysseus a man of constant sorrow. But what does O Brother Where Art Thou from? Because I do know it somewhere in the back of my head, and I remember making note, and now I don't remember.
So the film Sullivan's Travel, it's a Preston Sturges film, which the Coens are big fans of Preston Sturges and his style of comedy that he did back in the 40s and 50s. The main character, the director who wants to make a movie about the common man and the struggles during the Depression, the title of the film he's making is called "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?"
Huh. That is not what I have heard. I've heard it somewhere else that must be a nod to that. So that's interesting. I'll have to look that.
Yeah, it's a really good movie.
So Odysseus is called a man of constant sorrow or a man of great sorrow. There are many different ways that he's described through this book. In the original Homer epic, the Iliad, Odysseus plays a huge role, but he is not called a man of sorrow. He is known as the man who can talk his way into or out of anything. Very slick talker. And Odysseus actually is the one who contrived the idea for the Trojan horse. And so they definitely captured that with George Clooney's I've Always Got an Answer. He's a very slick talker. The issue about his always needing his hair palm and waking up in the morning and saying, "How's my hair?" That's just Coen Brothers. That wasn't part of Odysseus' story, but it is a lovely addition. And one of my favorite things, I think the most quotable for me line in the film is when they're trying to get a car part and they can't, and then he's trying to get his Dapper Dan and he can't. He told, "I can order it for you. It'll be 2 weeks." And he says, "What a geographical oddity. 2 weeks from everywhere." I think about that all the time. I find a number of reasons to say, "What a geographical oddity. 2 weeks from everywhere."
Yeah, just the obsession with the hair treatment and like the hair nets and everything. It's a great addition, and I love that's how the dogs find them is from.
Right.
Well, that's how John Goodman sniffed them out too.
But that is things like that make his character. I mean, he is unique in all of filmdom. He's got his own way of looking at the world that makes sense. And there's so many great lines, like when the guys get baptized and he says, "These here are as dumb as a bag of hammers." Things like that are just that enters into our cultural vernacular, you know.
So I wanted to bring up, you mentioned the character Tommy Johnson, and obviously this is lots of references and connections and basically an American retelling of the Odyssey, but I love how they interwove kind of American mythology because Tommy Johnson he's basically Robert Johnson, the blues musician who supposedly sold his soul to the devil so he could play guitar.
And then they had to describe the devil as something that matches something from Greek mythology. So, yeah.
And then Charles Deering's character is based off a real person too, which I believe was a Texas senator or candidate, not Mississippi, but there was an actual Pappy O'Daniel in real life who
But probably his wasn't Menelaus.
who started out as a flower, making money in the flower business as well.
Well, and they used the "You Are My Sunshine." They used that throughout, and "You Are My Sunshine" was written by the Louisiana governor. Now I can't remember his name, which is ridiculous because I grew up in Louisiana and I should be flogged for not coming up with that. Jimmy Davis. Governor Jimmy Davis wrote "You Are My Sunshine," which is far more remembered than Governor Jimmy Davis. That's another, but also that would have been later. Coen Brothers were not concerned about how timelines work. That song did not exist at the time when this movie takes place. But also, I mean, things like the Babyface Nelson, his timeline doesn't match this at all.
Yeah, I read that like he had already been dead for 2 years based on whatever year this movie takes place.
Right, and that's okay. I mean, they didn't tell us they were going to, that they were creating a historic, true story epic. So, looking at all. Also, in terms of names that they played with, they used the name Ithaca, Mississippi, for where he's trying to go, where his happy is. And Ithaca obviously was the island that was Odysseus' home, where that was his little kingdom. Ithaca is a real island. You can still go visit there. It's apparently really beautiful. It's apparently about 90 miles from end to end, which is considered small for an island. But it's, I actually looked it up the other day. It's on my bucket list.
Yeah, I think they did an amazing job. I guess it's so much considered adapted that it was nominated for an adapted screenplay Oscar, even though it's very much Coen-esque. Like I think it could almost be an original screenplay, but I guess the similarities are close enough it's counted as an adaptation.
Yeah, that's odd to me because it really is their own, and they just, like I said, they used names, they used places, they gave nods to some of the events, and it's fun for those of us who have studied the Odyssey to watch that. But if I went into it with an attitude of this better get the Odyssey right, I would be very stuck because it does not. It does not tell that story, and it mixes up the times, and it changes characters and major circumstances. It gets just enough to have that feeling. I don't know if you heard me at the beginning, because that was when we were having technical difficulties, but I was saying that my other favorite Odyssey film is Cold Mountain with Nicole Kidman and Jude Law.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
and that is one that works harder at actually telling the story of the Odyssey. All of the different things that Odysseus struggled with on his way home, but they don't play with names. The Coen Brothers had fun with that. Cold Mountain is not trying to have fun, but it's definitely telling Homer's story, and it doesn't even say, you have to watch it and say, oh my God, this is the Odyssey. Because it doesn't say at the beginning, a retelling of Homer's Odyssey or whatever. I don't remember exactly what it is, but it says, but in the opening screen of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is letting you know that that's what they're playing at, and Cold Mountain doesn't do that.
Interesting. I've never seen Cold Mountain, so I didn't know it was like a similar story as well.
You should.
It's
decent.
Sorry, but it's
right. It's the Civil War era, not the Depression. So you've done an excellent job of telling us, how it's connected, the differences, and its adaptation of retelling the the Odyssey and the Coen Brothers sense, which I think is what they do generally with anything, is they take something, because they've done multiple types of movies and they're like, well, we're going to make it like how we would do this type of story or this type of movie.
The most informed I think I've ever felt in.
I'm sorry, I didn't know. I think we still have a lag, and I didn't know if you were going to say something more. But yes, and I think that in doing so, kind of like the Queen's Gambit got a whole bunch of people interested in chess who never were before. A film like that openly says, you know, this is a modern retelling of such and such. If you enjoy that film, you're more likely to go back and read, or at least read about whatever the original was. And the thing that I particularly love about Greek mythology is that so much of our modern, I mean, our language for sure, our religion, whatever religion you hold to, so much of it is plundered from the original Greek, the creation stories and the God stories and the hero stories. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are great, but there's so much more before that, and there's so much good after that all of our cultures have cherry-picked from, and in some cases just taken a huge chunk out of and applied it to the modern era, or just carried it on down through history. And it's so interesting to me, whether you're talking about George Clooney today or whether you're talking about George Clooney's character in the Depression, people just have not changed. We still want the same things. We want somebody to love in a better house, and that's what connects us all. We want to laugh, we want to cry, we want to overcome our fears, we want to increase pleasure and decrease pain. And so when you take a story like the Odyssey and modernize it so that a modern audience, whether they're there to laugh at George Clooney and his hairnet or whether they're there to suffer with Jude Law in Cold Mountain, it helps us to see how humanity has not, what drives us, what motivates us, has not changed in all of these millennia. We're the same. You know, we write it down differently. We're not so big into epic poetry anymore and I think we're poorer for it. I think we'd be more literate if we did more things in epic poetry. But even if we can still just learn the same lessons, but from the Coen Brothers perspective, the message is the same, that human beings are, you know, we've learned how to mass market and live on dry cereal in a way that the Greeks didn't. But otherwise, we're just human beings are the same.
Yeah, that's true. It's very true. I'd like to just talk about just the movie itself with performances. I mean, we talked about Tim Blake Nelson. I think it's kind of great that George Clooney's character thinks he's a smart man, but really he isn't. And basically, almost every time he works with the Coens, they have him purposely play like a numbskull, as they call it.
Right, and he's very good at that. It takes a great deal of intelligence to play dumb.
Yeah, and apparently he like just heard they wanted him to be in the movie and he didn't even read the script. So he was just like, yeah, Coens, you guys want me in your movie? Okay. And he had his uncle from Kentucky, because I don't know if you guys know this, George Clooney is actually originally from Kentucky. Had his uncle, who was a Baptist tobacco farmer, record himself reading the script to get like the cadence or something of the character. I don't know, but the uncle took out all the swear words when he was reading the script. And like the Coens noticed it when Clooney was acting. They're like, you should be saying like damn right now, or hell or something.
That's great.
That is funny. I did not know that, but his uncle cleaned it up.
Yeah. And then I think we get some of their regular actors they work with. Of course, John Turturro as Pete, and John Goodman is the one-eyed Bible salesman.
I love Goodman in this. As always, like
he's kind of playing a similar character that he played in Barton Fink a little
Yeah,
bit.
he's
Like,
channeling. That's what I noticed. He was channeling Barton Fink, but the way he just casually stands up.
so that was an earlier Coen Brothers film. It's about a playwright played by John Turturro who goes out to Hollywood around the 30s or 40s to write a movie script, and he's kind of in this like weird hellscape hotel. He forms the friendship with John Goodman, who is supposedly a salesman, but is some kind of nefarious. It's a very weird and existential movie, but it's kind of the film that film critics anointed them as. They won the Cannes Film Festival with that one, even though their three earlier films were well received. This was kind of the one that put them on critics' radars.
Everybody has one of those, I guess, and you have to try a few times before you get there.
Yeah, and then of course they get very widely popular with the, I guess, financial and critical success of Fargo and awards recognition. So by the time they do Oh Brother, they're at least people are like, oh, the Coens have a new movie out.
We'll go, right?
Yeah, for people who like, but like I said, for some reason this movie crosses over and it may be their most mainstream film they've ever done. The only other two I can think of is maybe Raising Arizona and True Grit, and True Grit's partly just because people know that because
Yeah,
it was
the
our,
original.
yeah, there was an earlier version.
Raising Arizona is a film that I only saw once because Nicolas Cage makes me need a flea bath. I quit. Tried, and then the powers that be decided to put Nicolas Cage in a Michael Caine film, and so I had to go see it. And then that was The Weatherman, and he actually made me cry, and I felt really tricked that I'm sitting there crying over Nicolas Cage. That was just wrong in my life. I was trying to maintain a streak. Also, Oh Caesar. Was it Oh Caesar? Is that what it's called?
Hail Caesar.
Hail Caesar. Yeah. I only saw that once, but it was a wild ride. It was a lot of fun. And again, George Clooney playing dumb.
Right.
Was fun. So kind of the moment where George Clooney is sitting under the tree eating chicken, and John Goodman breaks off a limb and bashes Delmer in the head, and he just kind of casually says, "What's up, Big Dan?"
I don't get it.
Definitely a scene in Hail Caesar where he's in the house and they're about to be raided. He's still just kind of like, "Wonder what's going on here." Just very. It was that same sort of character.
Yeah, he's done about 4 films with them now, and supposedly they wanted to do something they called a Numbskull trilogy, where he just plays an idiot in everything he does with them.
That's amazing.
Well, he's very
pull
good at
off.
it. I enjoy that part of him much more. I mean, I can't think of another film, and I know Clooney is a prolific and popular actor, but for me, I can't think of another thing I've seen him in that tops Oh Brother. To me, that's the quintessential George Clooney film.
I think he's very good at being a comedic actor. Of course, it helps when you have people who are.
He's great in Oceans.
Yeah, that's kind of more of his cool persona that he usually plays. So this is kind of fun to see him play this when, like, for someone who looks like George Clooney does, for him to make a fool out of himself is
He was super cool. He was a cool fool. And it was because he did not know that there was anything foolish. He was so confident. He was so, but not cocky confident, just cool confident. Like he had the answer to everything. And really, mostly, it worked out. He worked it out, even if sometimes by accident. You know, the fact that he rallied them to go in and sing Into the Can, and then it was that song, which was, you know, sort of Odysseus' theme, Man of Constant Sorrow, is what saved their bacon at the end, because Pappy O'Dannell wanted them to be, he wanted to put them on his brain trust because they were popular. And And so that's how they got their pardon, So even though he does kind of play it all worked out. He got everything he wanted, except it leaves us with that he's got to go back and find that wedding ring.
Now that's buried under how much water?
It's at the bottom of a lake.
Yeah.
But that too. I mean, Odysseus. It was all a sea voyage, and it was all that Poseidon was keeping him from making it home, from getting off the sea. And this big lake was also kind of a nod to Homer and the original character. But yeah, I think that I think there's a difference in playing dumb and being dumb. He clearly, because we have the dumb character, that's Delmar. He's sort of the childlike, whereas George Clooney, obviously, Ulysses Everett McGill obviously masterminded their escape. He got them out of a number of difficult situations. He had an answer for everything. He had a solution for everything. And while he is kind of the small thinking everyman, he's still Odysseus in that, he could talk anybody in or out of anything.
Well, he practiced dentistry.
He makes it work. And then at the end, ultimately, he has saved them.
Yep. A performance it reminds me of, and maybe it's a different kind of confidence, but it's reminiscent of Kurt Russell's performance in Big Trouble in Little China.
I can see that. I haven't seen that movie in a really long time, but I can see that. Kurt Russell is one of those, I feel like I raised him because of all the stuff he did when he was a kid and then a teenager. And he's older than me, but I was watching all that stuff when I was a kid, so I thought he was a kid, So every time I see him now, I'm like, hey, it's the computer that wore tennis shoes.
I think it's great they got to work with Holly Hunter again. I wish she had more to do in this movie, but that's almost anything she's in. I wish she has more to do in the movie.
Yeah, for me, Holly Hunter, she doesn't even have to say anything. When she does, it's glorious because I love her voice. Whatever it is she does with her tongue and her teeth that gets her almost a lisp, but not really. And then her very unique Southern accent. But even if she doesn't speak, you know exactly what's happening because you're looking her in the eyes and her face. She has such great facial expression, and she does get to use that at the end when Ulysses is singing, and she knows he's singing to her, and she knows he's going to get caught, and that her boyfriend is going to see him, and the facial expressions that she makes, just what am I going to do? What is happening here? Is just classic Holly Hunter and wonderful. It's the one thing we miss of her Incredibles film is that we don't ever actually see her facial expressions.
No, we just get that wonderful voice.
Yeah, and attitude.
Yep. Oh yeah, lots of attitude. I think that movie with the two leads was great voice casting there for both Mr. and Mrs. Incredible. The other actor I think that's really great in this is Charles During. I think he's hilarious in this movie.
I think, yes, definitely. There's so many. There's a line that he says that I think of all the time where he says, we're not one at a time in here, we're mass communicating. I think about that all the time because I literally do my therapy patients are one at a time. And I always think to myself, we're not one at a time in here, we're mass communicating. Yes, that's very funny. And the scene on the front porch where they're talking about how they're getting their asses kicked, and he says, it's more of a kicking situation. It's one of those. This whole film, there's no throwaway lines. You have to listen to every line. Every line is there for a reason, and should be listened to and considered because for humor value and for furthering the story. There's just it's so well done and well delivered.
And talking about that scene, like before he even says anything or he's yelling at his two, I guess they're his speechwriters or campaign managers or his son, like his facial expressions on his face when he's looking at them is just priceless.
Well, and he's another one of those, though, that thinks he's super smart.
Mm-hmm.
he's not cool about it like George Clooney is. He's kind of battering at everything with his cane, trying to beat everyone in the room. But he sees his opportunity to attach himself to these men who are so popular in the crowd that his opponent has already tried to decry, you know. So that's the one like really smart thing that he does. He just seizes a moment. But I think that ultimately, like if there was a sequel, I think that we would see George Clooney's character running the government and not actually Pepe O'Donnell.
Well, that's what he tells Delmar. He's like, "What's that mean?" And well, basically, we'll be the power behind the throne situation.
Right. Exactly. And that too goes back to Homer, because Odysseus was there with Menelaus, which is the name they've given Pepe O'Donnell, but he was definitely the smart one making all the decisions that the kings then got credit for.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just to get in one more little piece of Homer.
Oh, of course. I appreciate. I didn't know how much in depth we were gonna go, so I'm glad you brought it and let us know how the connections are between the story and this adaptation of it.
Well, I think the Coen Brothers want us to see all of that. That's why they tell us at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
This based on Homer's Odyssey, or the Odyssey by Homer, I think they say, because they want us to find and enjoy and appreciate all of those little signs and symbols and connections that they put in there. And who knows how much got added from their original idea after they added other people who knew the original story. You know, there could have been other things added in just as little gifts, tidbits to the audience.
Right. They do make another sort of film reference with the I guess he's a sheriff, but like the guy who collects the coins from the underworld. It's a very Cool Hand Luke sort of reference there with that character too.
The whole thing is ingenious in its construction, because if they had tried too hard to follow the Homeric story with all of the monsters and murders and whatever, it would have been a very different story. But they were able to give just enough of that and still keep it lighthearted and modern in a way. But you know what? So I mentioned this early on, but I want to add again, the choice to film the whole thing in that sepia tone just gives it automatically sucks you into the feeling of going home. Like even now in the 21st century, if you show a film that's in all the browns and golds, we just have a collective nostalgia feeling that sucks us in automatically. And that decision on its own really makes the film what it is, in my opinion. And it opens the door for all of that old-timey, as they would say, gospel music too, just the coloring.
Yeah, I think a lot, because you talking about this, like a lot of Wes Anderson's movies have this sort of coloring, and the Paddington films and Amelie and like The Shape of Water, even a little bit, like they call it, like with a lot of the color mise en scene, a lot of times with like all the different things going on in the movie. But I do think that's why this movie is so popular, is like what you're saying. It gives someone like a sense of relaxation, like going home, like, oh, this is peaceful, this is pleasant.
If I were to sum it up, it feels like biscuits and gravy.
But it's just that part of our collective unconscious.
Yeah.
Although I think if you actually were in Mississippi in that era, things weren't brown and gold. So
No.
It works that way, but it does.
And I want to say maybe this movie brought Alison Krauss into the forefront. I don't know how popular she was before this movie, but I certainly think this soundtrack helped make her popular, and probably a resurgence of bluegrass music in a lot of ways.
Definitely. And not just Alison Krauss, but also Emmylou Harris. And Emmylou Harris was a big part of my childhood because there were songs that she did that were sort of crossover. And Alison Krauss really is the same way. Alison Krauss and Emmylou Harris both they'll dabble in pop music just enough to pay for their bluegrass habit. I always say that about the Christian singer. Oh my God, what is her name? Amy something.
I think I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
But she'll release a pop song every once in a while just to continue to afford her Christian music habit. And I think that I knew Alison Krauss previous to this because of her recording of When You Say Nothing at All, which is really, really unspeakably beautiful. And so, but Emmylou Harris I had not heard from since my childhood. Amy Grant, sorry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Amy Grant.
Instead of waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning shouting, Grant! So I do think you're right that it brought attention to the two of them particularly as artists again, and for those of us who already knew them, it was a gift to hear them harmonizing, because particularly on that song, I Went Down to the River to Pray, because their harmony is so beautiful. Their voices are so well suited to each other, but to my knowledge, they hadn't ever done anything like that before, or at least certainly not on a grand scheme that the general public would be privy to or stumble across. So, but you're right. That's as soon as I saw that movie, I had to go straight out and buy the soundtrack. The soundtrack is its own character. But even so, listening to the soundtrack, I'm immediately sucked right back. Everything in my brain is the film.
Yeah, and T-Bone Burnett is the guy who assembled this, because normally the Coens work with Carter Burwell usually for their scores, but since this is more of a soundtrack than a score, they worked with T-Bone Burnett, who also helped assemble the soundtrack for The Big Lebowski, and then of course he came back and worked with them for Inside Llewellyn Davis, which is all about the folk music scene, but not quite as upbeat as this movie is.
Yeah, this is absolutely a feel-good film. You root for the underdog. The underdog has his day. There's not really a bad guy. I mean, we don't like that character that's trying to catch them and hang them, but he's not doing anything wrong. They escaped from prison. He's just doing his job.
Oh, I guess if there's any bad guys, it's the KKK and Homer Stokes.
They are not character. I mean, Homer Stokes obviously is throughout a character, but the KKK, that's just a scene in passing almost.
Yeah.
It's not focused on it. Obviously, Babyface Nelson was a bad guy, but the way they play him in here like an underdog also. He's just he's obviously, and when he's manic, he robs banks.
And doesn't like cows, which apparently they had to emphasize that those were not real cows that they hit or shot in the movie. They were computer generated.
Right, because, I mean, people get upset about that, but we always have to say animals were harmed in the making of this film. And I get that they were eating, no gophers were harmed in the making of this film. Anyway, there's so much richness to the film in every scene, and each of the characters that we've talked about and the characters we haven't talked about, and even people on the side, like the man who shouts, "And stay out of the Woolsworth." Like, I love that guy's whole story.
That's so great. Yeah, and that's just the Coens, because almost all their movies, there's always somebody, just the smallest character is so interesting. And I think they're so good at capturing the colloquialism of wherever the story takes place of what they're doing.
Right, like saying Woolsworth instead of Woolworth.
And like even some of their darker films, like even No Country for Old Men, there are characters and exchanges like you're like, yep, that is so Texas. That we know people like that.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's one of the movies that's just got too much violence for me. I have nightmares about some of the. I mean, I still just thinking about that film. It's upsetting, and that again is why I think that this film stands out from their catalog, because it isn't like that. There's not even. I mean, there's the one scene where the Cyclops hits Delmar with a stick, but outside of that, and the hints of we're going to hang somebody, we're going to lynch somebody. But there's not the overt, some guy with half his face shot off or up close, or the things like that have their place in other films, but this film didn't need it. And they could have done that. They could have made it a very different film, but didn't.
No, and that just shows how versatile they are as storytellers. Like, they're not just going to do the same thing over and over again. They're going to test the waters and stretch their writing and directing to see what other type of stories they can tell.
Yes, I agree.
While still very much feeling like it's in the company of some of their other work because of the humor and the dialogue and the characterizations that the actors do.
I think because the Coen Brothers do tend not as heavily as Christopher Guest, but they do tend to use their favorite players over and over, and use them in different ways and different kinds of characters. I think that's one of the things that makes. I think it's one of the things that makes people want to follow a specific director, because the director carries a thread, even if the stories are very different, but they'll use the same actors over and over. And I was just, obviously Wes Anderson does this heavy-handed, and that's great. I just said Christopher Guest. Christopher Guest has that core group of ad-libbers, that he does his mockumentaries with. And each one of those mockumentaries is a completely different setting, completely different story. Some of them are kind of downers. All of them are meant to be funny, but he uses these same people, and we get to watch them play different characters and stretch their wings. And then, those people become family to us, whether they like us or not. We have invited them into our living rooms over and over and over. And I think when a director reuses a group of actors, it solidifies not just those actors for the audience, but it makes it more likely that the audience is going to remember the name of the director. It's so easy to go watch a movie, a one-off movie, and come out of there and you don't remember who directed it or produced it, or you remember the actors. Reusing a group of actors the way the Coen tend to favorites helps us think about who the director is, and then we're looking at their just one movie at a time.
Yeah, it's almost theatrical of them to do that, because that's something that theatrical companies are known to do, is like keep the same group of cast of characters and just see, well, what kind of role can we put them in this time?
Right. As a small town theater director, I'd say that's absolutely true. Every time I've got a new show, I think, okay, here are my core people that I know I can count on. Wouldn't it be fun to see him do this and her do this, this time? So, yes.
Before we wrap this up and rate this film, there were two other things I found interesting when watching and then looking up facts about this film. So the song that they're playing at the beginning when the prison break is happening, that apparently was actual chain gang prisoners singing that. That's a recording of a chain gang singing.
Wow, I did not know that. That's great.
And in fact, they found one of the surviving members, and I forget how much they paid them to use his voice in the film, but yeah, they paid the guy. And then the
So
other,
you're about Big Rock Candy Mountain. You're talking about when the Chain Gang is actually that. First of all, we hear them doing a chant.
yeah, the Polazarus, I believe, is the song. Yeah, at the beginning of the film.
I did not know that. That's great.
And then the other thing I read, which I thought was just adorable, is apparently in the siren scene, Tim Blake Nelson actually like was a little flustered and like was blushing while they were filming because of, I guess, how good the actor was doing her job of seducing.
Yeah, that's funny. Not surprising, but funny. He probably doesn't get seduced often in a film.
Yeah, and like you said, I don't know if he'd been in any. He might have been. I didn't look up to see his credits, but like I had no idea who that guy was until this movie, and like that's what I think of every time I see him. But usually, every time I see him, he's one of those actors that I'm like, oh, they brought him in. Like he's like a welcome person to me. Like
Right.
even if it's just for one scene, like he's one of those actors to me that he does the most with what little he's given. Because I think he steals the show in this movie, honestly.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And the next thing I saw him in was The Good Wife with Jennifer Aniston, where he has a love scene with her, but it's just funny. He's coerced her, and she's trying to cooperate. His dog won't stop barking, and he can't make it happen, and that's just funny. And it's felt a little typecast. But then he was in that Gerard Butler movie where he played the vice president. This was just a few years ago. What was that movie called?
Is that it's one of those Olympus Fallen movies, right? There's like a few of those now.
I think it's The Eagle Has Fallen. But he played the vice president, and it's not at all a Delmar role. And wound up. It turned out he was the ultimate bad guy. But that was very good, and I love to see an actor that I already love as one despise him in another film, which that just means good acting.
Absolutely, and the Coens are great at getting those type of actors who can kind of step into almost any role.
All right, so I've forgotten how you rate the films. I know that I remember that we did this before, but I don't remember how it goes.
Oh, well, it's different for each director. So for the Coen Brothers, if you love this movie, you think it's an absolute masterpiece, one of their best, it's a damn fine picture. If you enjoy it, you think it's entertaining, it hits its marks, it's quirky but delightful. There's always the deep dive, which is, something a little more obscure, maybe just a cult film. If this is a little mediocre, it doesn't quite hit up to snuff of their normal filmography, we say it's funny looking, And then this one's a little bad, so pardon the language, but if it's terrible, it's horrible, it doesn't work at all. I'm like, there's no other word I would describe for a Coen Brothers movie if I was trying to describe a plot, but it's a clusterfuck.
So it would be, I would have to explain if I gave it anything but the damn good picture. Because it does stand out from their other films, because it does have so many elements of genius, the music, the casting, the lines, the way it connects to the classic, but you can enjoy it completely disconnected from the classic. The fact that I've watched it over and over and over and over and over and enjoyed it one time. I think it deserves the top rating.
I'm gonna absolutely agree with you. I mean, to me, like, this is one of their best, and I mean, this is coming from a filmography that is mostly, above average quality of most other people's body of work. But this is definitely a unique film in their filmography. It's charming, it's delightful, it's just a fun blast from beginning to end, and everyone is great in this movie.
And even though the characters are not overtly intellectual, the film is. And that's one of the other, like, there's not a single character in this film that you would say, oh, no, see, he's the genius mastermind of it all. But the film itself is ingenious and intellectual, even though the characters are not.
Yeah. Well, Minette, thank you so much for coming on. I apologize for technical difficulties.
That's just living in the country. I'm so sorry, but thank you for accommodating.
Oh, absolutely. Even if I am literally holding the phone and having you talk into my microphone, we do what we can. I appreciate your expert knowledge on the Odyssey and bringing the parallels. I didn't know we would get that deep into it, but I appreciate it and thank you for that.
Well, all right. That's what I said. You're probably going to regret. That's a kind of a of mine anyway. So, but you should go watch Cold Mountain. I keep wanting to say Cold Creek Manor. That's a totally different thing.
Yeah, I think that's some weird Dennis Quaid, Sharon Stone movie. But yeah, I should see Cold Mountain. It's from the guy that did The English Patient and The Talented Mr. Ripley.
But even if all you know of Homer's Odyssey is "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," you'll see those connections.
Great. I actually look forward to watching it. Before I let you go, because the Odyssey is a sequel to the Iliad, so to speak, is Troy one of the only movies Sean Bean doesn't die in? Because I think he played Odysseus in that.
Right. Yeah, maybe so. I did see Sean Bean as like Snow White's father or something in one of the live action movies. It turns out that he wasn't actually dead, and he comes back and it's Sean Bean. So, but yeah, he's good at dying for the cause. Yeah, Troy is. That's a whole other thing. When you want to talk about Troy, and you want to have me come in and tell you all the ways Troy had got it wrong. You know, when I said the Coen Brothers didn't say. We've a historical epic here. Troy is supposedly telling the story, and for anybody who sees Troy and hasn't read the Iliad, they're not going to get. But they got it all wrong, seriously wrong.
Yeah.
That's upsetting. Don't tell me you're doing a version of a historical story and then not actually do it. So that's a whole whole other thing. But yes, Sean Bean is wonderful in everything, and he was great as Odysseus, and he did not die. Because you know that he made it home to Penelope, even if that wasn't grateful.
So is the Odyssey one of the best sequels ever written?
You know, probably, especially when you think about how it has not just the Odyssey, but the Iliad and the Odyssey together, how they have impacted culture and all of the different, you know, the way that we tell stories is based in the way they told stories, and so yeah, in terms of impact on modern culture, definitely.
Yeah, I think Greek mythology is very foundational in our storytelling, even today. I mean, you could argue there'd be no Star Wars without Greek mythology.
Oh yeah, I would hold that argument with you for sure, except we'd be on the same side, so it wouldn't be a very good.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for your expert opinion and information. I really appreciate it. You step up the game of what we usually talk about sometimes, so I appreciate it and always enjoy talking basically anything art with you.
I appreciate being invited on. Stay away from the sun god's cows, and you'll be all right. Have a great weekend.
You do the same. Thank you. Bye. Thank you, everyone who sort of stayed in here. And if you're watching, I do apologize for our technical difficulties. If you did get to hear most of what Minette was talking about, I really appreciate it. If you didn't because of the volume or editing, really, she just went into great detail of the Odyssey written by Homer and how it's similar to Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And if you haven't seen Oh Brother Where Art Thou, or you haven't watched it in a while, it's on Amazon right now. Please go check it out. It is a delightful film and really fun, and it does have an amazing soundtrack. We're going to be back next week with another returning guest. Brandon Stanwyck is coming in. We're going to be talking about perhaps the Coens' most film noir, The Man Who Wasn't There, and maybe their most existential film ever made. Tomorrow morning, join us for the brunch show as we continue with the summer of 1982. We'll be talking the sequel to Mad Max, The Road Warrior. Thanks for watching, and have a great weekend. Bye. Please follow us on our Facebook page, our YouTube page, and our Twitter page, where I will be posting this later.